Norberto, gracias. Buenos dias. Good morning, everybody. It's an honor to be here, Norberto. Thank you for the kind introduction. It's really an honor for me to be part of this esteemed panel, especially my good and long-standing friend Doug Farah, who's done some of the best work in this field, looking at the nexus of organized crime and illicit finance of anybody that I've known. So it's really an honor to be here. I want to thank FIU for hosting us on short notice, and I want to thank all the sponsors, including the Institute. In my 5 minutes, I want to talk a bit about the centrality of organized crime as a threat to democracy and a threat to the integrity of the financial system. The extreme forms of violence, the infiltration of economies, the corruption of systems, and even the capture of institutions is a fundamental threat to Latin America as well as globally. I was privileged, starting early in my career. I was a prosecutor, a counterterrorism prosecutor. One of the first cases I worked on was on the murder of 3 American citizens by the FARC, who were murdered in Colombia and then taken over the border into Venezuela. At the Treasury Department, I was privileged to lead the effort in the creation of the Office of Terrorism and Financial Intelligence, where we used sanctions policy and anti-money laundering controls to make it harder, costlier, and riskier for what we said America's enemies to raise and move money around the world. And more that included not just state actors, but non-state actors and criminal actors. And then at the White House, we saw the growing convergence that Doug talked about between state and non-state actors to not only threaten democracy, but also to profit and to corrupt institutions and sectors. I think it's why, in part, the Cuban government called me Bush's mercenary, which I take as a badge of honor. But I want to build off of what Doug said, and his description of the waves of criminality are very interesting because of the academic treatment of the waves of democracy. My first book is called Forging Democracy, very much took from the work of Samuel Huntington and others talking about the 3 waves of democracy. I really like Doug's framing of 4 waves of illicit activity and the contrarians to democracy. The way I like to think of that 4th wave is of a convergence of 3 key factors. The first is a convergence of activities among criminal actors. Drug trafficking, human trafficking, arms trafficking, matched now with illegal mining, and also then the co-optation of rare earth mineral production, all in furtherance of profit for illicit actors. That then blended with extortion and infiltration of sectors of economies that are controlled by criminal actors, where ownership and control is mixed between licit and illicit activities. Then you have the profits and proceeds that are used to form a cycle of corruption that then allows further and further empowerment, a vicious cycle of empowerment of these groups. And so the activities are blended and converged. You have a convergence of actors. You have an admixture of criminal organizations, cartels, gangs, as well as terrorist groups. My experience with Hezbollah was watching Hezbollah take full advantage of the European drug trade, moving product from South America, laundering those proceeds through the United States and Canada, using used car dealers and the shipment of cars into West Africa to then move goods into Europe and also proceeds into Lebanon. And so a very clear admixture of criminality, illicit finance, and terrorism, which, by the way, explains then why there's such a challenge with how to define these groups. Are they criminals? Are they terrorists? Are they state proxies? Are they militant groups? In some cases, they're all of the above, right? The admixture of these groups. Made worse by the fact that now Venezuela and Nicaragua, as Doug described very aptly, use these groups as state proxies, instruments of state activity for profit and also for political control. You also then have supply chains that are evolving, whether it's in the lithium context, as the professor mentioned, with China in the Southern Cone, or the fentanyl trade with Chinese precursor providers fueling the activity of Mexican cartels, which is then fueling activity into the United States, which has drawn so much attention, certainly to the corruption of the Mexican financial system as a result. So you have this admixture of actors happening in this fourth wave, as Doug has described. And then finally, a challenge and an admixture of governance, where in pockets around the world, you have criminal actors actually in control of territory, control of institutions, and co-opting and embedding within those territories and activities. And that, of course, then has implications for civil society, because that control then means co-optation of the judiciary, the media, NGOs, the co-optation of all the civil actors, and the fueling of fear that doesn't allow for independent voices to check the growth of those actors. All of this is fueled by profit, rational economic actors finding opportunity, but it's enabled by opacity, impunity, and immorality. The opacity of lack of transparency, who owns and controls companies, accounts, corruption of officials, who are they really acting on behalf of, embedding in sectors of the economy in ways that are not clearly understood. Impunity with a lack of accountability for the violence against institutions and actors, prosecutors, politicians that are speaking out against these actors, a fear to hold powerful people and institutions to account, and in the worst and most extreme cases of impunity, an open brazenness to the criminality and the corruption, because there is so much control of the economy and of the political institutions. And finally, immorality, the extreme violence used to silence voices, the 32 Mexican candidates killed in the run-up to the June 2024 election, the killing of the presidential candidate in Ecuador in 2023, of course, as an extreme example. Extreme violence meant to cow voices and civil society. Extortion and fraud and illicit finance that impoverishes people and families, that undermines the ability of people to make a living and undermines the ability of people to aspire. And of course, the long-term effects of corruption and kleptocracy that hollows out economies for short-term gain with prejudice to long-term effects. So that's all very negative and very problematic, but I come from the world of what do you do next? What is to be done? You have to have a strategy to attack all elements of their power, including illicit finance. You have to expose what they're doing. Doug's work is case in point. Sunlight is the best disinfectant. Supporting independent media voices, using new technology to expose what's really happening. Having accountability, not just criminal accountability, but also in the markets with banks, investors, all having power from the outside to draw accountability on the inside. And having a new strategy of how we network and support each other. This conference is a good example, Norberto. I think the bad guys collude, the state authoritarians work with the anti-democratic forces, working with the criminal forces. We too need to think more aggressively about networking among the democratic allies. FIUs, financial intelligence units, sharing more information. Banks working more proactively and investors working more proactively to demand anti-corrupt environments and silos. Prosecutors collaborating across borders, supporting each other. Civil society, NGOs supporting as well. All with the use of new technologies, many of which are intended to democratize the sharing of information or financial autonomy. These need to be used and enabled for the forces of democratic good. And so with that, I think we should leave on an optimistic note. There's a lot to be done in the face of a lot of corruption and a lot of collaboration among the enemies of democracy. Thank you very much.